What's going on, everybody? Khaleep's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. Now, you might be wondering, what's the point of comparing a really low-end phone like the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G to pretty much a flagship phone like the S21 FE? But if you're new to 5G phones or just smartphones in general, you might be on the fence about whether you want to get something more affordable like the A14 5G or spend a little bit more and get something higher end like the S21 FE. So we're going to go over the similarities and differences between these two to give you a better idea of which device is going to be more worth it for you. Now, as always, if you do want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, we're getting a 6.6-inch 90Hz PLS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. With the S21 FE, we're getting a 6.4-inch 120Hz dynamic AMOLED display. This phone also has a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 411, and a 20:9 aspect ratio as well. So surprisingly, these displays are actually pretty similar. The main differences are that, first of all, as you can clearly see, the A14 5G is a bit larger at 6.6 inches versus 6.4. So if you do like a larger display, if you're going to be on your phone a lot, things are going to be a little bit nicer and easier to see on the A14 5G. But on the other hand, with the S21 FE, with the dynamic AMOLED, the colors are going to be a lot better, the brightness is better, and the viewing angles are quite a bit better too. It's not really that visible here, but if you're outside in the sun, for example, the S21 FE is going to be a lot easier to see. Now, I don't imagine a lot of people are going to be in that kind of situation all the time, but just keep in mind, the quality of the colors and just the image in general with the S21 FE are going to be a little bit better. But honestly, for most people, the A14 5G does have a really nice looking image. It does have a 1080p resolution, so the image is nice and sharp, just like the S21 FE. So really, if you're just going to be consuming a lot of content, watching YouTube videos, for example, stuff like that, I honestly think the A14 5G is going to be perfectly fine. But on the other hand, if you don't really mind having a slightly smaller display, and you want the most premium looking image between the two, then I could see going with the S21 FE. But again, I feel like for most people, for the display, the A14 5G is still going to be perfectly fine for almost everything. Now for storage, with the A14 5G, we are getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the S21 FE, we're getting 128GB, and unfortunately this phone does not have microSD card expansion. And keep in mind, there is another version of this phone that has 256, and again, that one doesn't have microSD card expansion either. So on one hand, if you're taking lots of pictures, recording lots of videos, stuff like that, the microSD card expansion can make a huge difference. But honestly, with double the internal storage, I still feel like the S21 FE does have an advantage here. That being said though, while 64GB in my opinion is really a bare minimum at this point in 2023, and I would definitely not get a phone that has less. For the average user, as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone, and you make sure to use a microSD card when you can, I do think this storage is going to be perfectly fine. But if you are someone who's constantly downloading stuff like apps, games, stuff like that, or maybe you just don't want to ever have to worry about space, then 128 is probably going to be quite a bit better for you. So in that case, the S21 FE will have a significant advantage. That being said though, one thing I do want to point out is that you really don't need to go this high end to get 128GB. In fact, there are phones in pretty much the same price range as the A14 5G that actually do have 128GB. So if that's really all you're looking for, then while of course in this specific comparison, the S21 FE will technically have an advantage, getting a phone this high end for storage alone is really not necessary. But of course, I guess the main point here is that with the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, in this kind of price range, 64GB is pretty standard, whereas for a higher end device like the S21 FE, at this point in 2023, you're really not going to find anything less than 128. For security features, both phones do have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners. With the A14 5G, it's right here on the power key, and with the S21 FE, it's in the display. But starting with the A14 5G, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the S21 FE. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive. No issues at all. No issues at all. And again, remember, both phones do have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. Then for video, this phone has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so in this price range, that's pretty standard. Then for the S21 FE, we got a nice looking hole punch design for the front facing camera. This camera is 32 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 12 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. And then for video, this phone has a max recording quality of 4K in both the rear and front cameras, so for a higher end phone like this, definitely not surprising. So in general, when it comes to photo quality, the S21 FE definitely has a huge advantage here, since first of all, this phone does have an ultra wide camera, whereas unfortunately, the A14 5G doesn't. I was really hoping they would add it in, considering that at this point in 2023, pretty much every phone has an ultra-wide camera, but unfortunately, of course, that didn't happen. So if you do want an ultra-wide camera, between the two, the S21 FE will have an advantage. In addition to this, with the S21 FE, the telephoto lens is also a real cool feature. Not only can it get close-up detailed images pretty much just like any macro camera, but it can also get distance photos. So if you want to zoom in on things, the S21 FE is going to have a huge advantage there. In addition to the features, the quality in general is going to be quite a bit higher with the S21 FE, which is not surprising, considering this is a much higher end device. But with that being said, I do think the photo quality we get with the A14 5G for regular photos and stuff like portrait mode is going to be perfectly fine for most people. If you're taking pictures for like Instagram, for example, trust me, I've taken plenty of Instagram photos with the S21 FE, and while they do look good, compared to the pictures you can get with the A14 5G, it's not really that different. I mean, on one hand, in real life, when you're actually looking at the photos side by side, you will see a significant difference, but on a social media platform, with something like Instagram where they're going to be compressing the images anyway, it's really not going to make a difference, and I feel like most people just really aren't going to notice. So I guess my main point here is if you're really taking a lot of photos, maybe you're into mobile photography or something like that, and you really want to get the best photo quality between the two, then yeah, you will be better off with the S21 FE. But on the other hand, if you're really more of a casual camera user, and you're only really taking a few pictures here and there for social media, or maybe just your own memories, then in that case, as long as you're okay with not having an ultra-wide camera, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G is honestly going to be perfectly fine. Now, to give you an idea of what they can actually do, here's a picture taken with the A14 5G. As you can see here, definitely a pretty good picture. In general, again, I feel like for almost everyone, for more casual personal use, the A14 5G's camera is plenty good enough for pretty much any kind of situation. Now, here's a picture taken with the S21 FE, and sure, you can see a pretty big difference in quality here. But at the same time, I feel like, again, for more casual use, stuff like social media posts like Instagram and things like that, where again, the images are going to be compressed and probably not look as high quality on the actual platform itself anyway. In that kind of situation, while the S21 FE still will look incrementally better, when it comes to the actual price difference, it really makes you wonder, do you really want to spend double, triple, quadruple the price to get a 10% better photo? Maybe some people really do, and in that case, yeah, the S21 FE is going to be a better choice. But again, if you really don't care that much, then keep in mind, the A14 5G does not have a bad camera by any means. Really, the biggest two drawbacks are, first of all, the A14 5G doesn't have an ultra-wide camera, which that is pretty disappointing, and second of all, it can't record 4K videos. But if you don't really care about those two things, then again, I feel like it is going to be perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 1330 processor. With the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor. So overall, between the two, of course, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE being a much higher end device is going to be quite a bit faster. But that being said, I do want to point out that with the A14 5G, especially compared to its predecessor, the A13 5G, but also honestly compared to the vast majority of phones in this price range, I do think the performance we're getting with this phone is actually pretty impressive for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, streaming videos, and some light mobile gaming. For that kind of activity, I do think the A14 5G is going to be perfectly fine, and you honestly don't need to spend $700 or $800 on the S21 FE just for those basic activities. That being said though, with the S21 FE, this phone is significantly faster in pretty much every way. So no matter what you're doing, you are technically going to get a better experience with the S21 FE. It really just depends on how much that extra speed is actually worth it for you. Of course, if you're doing more demanding activities like high performance mobile gaming, for example, I haven't even tested a lot of that stuff on the A14 5G, and there might be some games this phone can't even run. So if you are doing a lot of that kind of stuff, then you are going to be a lot better off with the S21 FE. On the other hand though, I still feel like for the average user, the A14 5G is going to be plenty fast enough. So if you're really not using your phone for a whole lot, then you're really not going to go wrong with this phone either. Now I did run benchmark tests on both phones using Geekbench 5, and here are the results I got. So as you can see again, the the S21 FE does have a huge advantage here, but honestly for what it is, the A14 5G really isn't bad either. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of which phone is a better upgrade for you. Because you might find out that, well, of course, the S21 FE is clearly the faster phone between the two. The A14 5G might be a really good upgrade for you already. So yeah, at the end of the day, it really comes down to what you're looking for. If you're looking for a more basic device for more casual activities, the A14 5G is going to be perfectly fine. But again, if you're more of a heavy user, then you might want to go with the S21 FE instead. Now for the batteries, with the A14 5G, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15 watt fast charging. And with the S21 FE, we're getting a 4500 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. So when it comes to battery life and longevity, the A14 5G does have a bit of an advantage here. And while in my experience, for what it is, the battery life with the S21 FE is actually pretty decent, it will still be better with the A14 5G. So if that's really a priority for you, then definitely keep this in mind. And another thing I do want to point out here is that with the S21 FE, this phone does actually have wireless charging, whereas the A14 5G doesn't. Now, I don't think anyone's really going out of their way for that feature. It's not really that important. I mean, I barely ever hear anyone talk about it. So in general, I know it's not really that special of a feature, but keep in mind, the S21 FE being more of a flagship phone is going to have certain features you only really find in higher end devices. Whereas with the A14 5G, when it comes to stuff like wireless charging and just a more premium design in general, this phone really doesn't have that kind of thing. In addition to this, with 25 watt fast charging versus only 15, the S21 FE is going to charge up quite a bit faster, especially considering the battery is a bit smaller. And while battery life in general may be a bit more important than charging speed, it is still something to keep in mind. For the software, both phones do have Android 13, which is not really surprising considering, on one hand, the S21 FE is a higher end device and Samsung has great software support anyway, and on the other hand, the A14 5G is a brand new device in 2023. So either way, if you want the latest version of Android, you're really not going to go wrong here. That being said though, keep in mind, the A14 5G being a bit newer is probably going to get one more update in the future than the S21 FE. The A14 5G should be getting Android 14, 15, and 16, and 17 I think, whereas I believe the S21 FE is going to stop a year sooner. Now I don't know how many people actually keep the same phone for that long, but all the same, if that is something that's important to you, definitely keep this in mind. In addition to this, both phones do have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, keep in mind you can do that with either phone. But in conclusion, which of these devices is actually going to make the most sense for you? In general, while the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is clearly the better device here, I feel like for the average user doing more moderate, average activities, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G is honestly going to be perfectly fine, despite the S21 FE having a slightly higher quality display with the dynamic AMOLED, which granted does make a huge difference. The A14 5G still does have a 1080p resolution and a really nice looking image, and it is a tiny bit larger too. So if you're consuming a lot of content and that's really all you're doing, maybe you're watching lots of YouTube videos, stuff like that, the A14 5G is going to be a perfectly fine choice for that. It also has a decent amount of storage. Even though the S21 FE has a lot more, you still don't need to spend this much more money to get more storage. I mean, there are plenty of phones between the A14 5G and the S21 FE that do have plenty of storage. So honestly, I don't think that's a reason to justify getting a higher end device like this. But still, again, between the two, if you really are someone who's downloading all kinds of games and stuff like that, then you might want to consider getting a higher end device anyway. But again, for the average user, I do think the A14 5G is going to have plenty of storage for you. Then with the camera, again, the S21 FE is significantly better in this area. It can record 4K videos, takes way better photos, has an ultra wide camera and a telephoto lens. So honestly, in every single way imaginable, this S21 FE has a much better camera, but at the same time, for more casual use, if you're really just taking a couple Instagram photos for example, the A14 5G is honestly going to be perfectly fine. I don't really see why you would need anything more than this if that's all you're doing with your camera. But of course, if the camera is really important to you, which personally, I definitely do understand that, so if that is you, the S21 FE will be a better choice. And not only this, but I feel like for the money, this phone has one of the best cameras you can get. The performance is kind of the same thing too. For more basic activities, the A14 5G is really all you're going to need. But if you're going to be on your phone a lot doing more demanding things like high performance mobile gaming, you will get a much better experience with S21 FE. So in general, it really comes down to what you're actually using your phone for. On one hand, if you just need something basic that works, then in that case, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G is going to be perfectly fine for you in pretty much every way. On the other hand though, if you really do want to get the best kind of value for the money, you don't really mind spending a bit more, and you want really good performance, a really nice camera that can record 4K videos, and just a more premium phone in general, then in that case, the S21 FE is probably going to be worth it for you. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalibis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.